Saturn in Leo is an example of a planet in extreme detriment. So in other words, not only is it in the sign that's opposite from its own domicile, but it's additionally in the sign that's opposite from its root domicile, or Multrikon. So it's the most difficult sign for a planet to occupy, even though technically debilitation is a lower dignity. At least debilitation has a sort of pizzazz to it because of the possibility for it to turn around into something great. Extreme detriment kind of lacks that potential. So let's examine Saturn in Leo and get a taste for what this extreme detriment is all about. To do that, let's first of all take a moment to look at Leo and Saturn separately, starting with Leo. Basically, what Leo signifies is mature masculinity. And what is masculinity essentially? Essentially, masculinity is the outward force as represented by the genitalia itself. And so Leo is a sign that has to do with assertion, so giving of commands, and that showing your strength, so exuding a confidence. And this is why Leo is a very dominant zodiac sign. The expression of command puts you in a dominant position. So Leo is very supportive of leadership and the kind of leadership power that we call charisma, which is kind of the magic that makes people follow you. Now, the other thing about masculinity is that it's muscular. It has strength. This is why Leo is a sign of power and authority, having strength and using it. And also the muscularity of masculinity gives it a harder shell. So it's impervious. In fact, you don't penetrate a male without emasculating the male. So Leo is an impervious sign, which means that it's insensitive. It's not going to be easily moved or touched by things. And that gives it some stability and constancy, reliability. The bottom line of all of the stuff about Leo is independence, which in the case of Leo really takes the shape of self-sufficiency, being your own ruler, being your own leader, etc. That's Leo. Let's have a quick look through Saturn, even though we've looked through it. This will be the 5th time now in the series. Just real quickly, Saturn is the planet of negativity, and that means it's a minus sign. So it represents the decrease of things. It reduces things, and therefore it implies failure. This is why it's a planet of having less. So it's a planet that signifies scarcity, poverty, neediness. Decreasing means you're getting rid of things. Getting rid of things means you're destroying them. Planet Saturn signifies destruction, or at least restriction. We'll look at both of those themes separately. First, let's look at the theme of destruction. Another word for destruction is death. And everything that leads to death: age, decay, illness, decline. And since Saturn symbolizes death, it also symbolizes the amount of time you have until you die. So it's about longevity, which doesn't just have to literally do with your physical lifespan, but it has to do with your tenacity in general and your endurance in general. How long you can keep doing something before you have to stop. As I said, we look also at the restriction concept of decreasing things by restriction. This is why Saturn is the planet of things that are restricted or held down or made subordinate. So it's a planet of subordination, of pushing things down. And therefore it represents the people that are downtrodden or oppressed or subordinated. So it's a planet of the masses. It's a planet of the slave, the servant, the employee. Now, going all the way back up to the top, negativity also implies pessimism, because pessimism means your focus is on what is wrong, because you want to know what you should decrease or remove. So Saturn is a pessimistic symbol, and it signifies distrust and skepticism. Because of being skeptical, Saturn is critical. And because it's critical, it's very good for logical thinking, rational thinking, and therefore it's very favorable to science. Finally, in order to critique something, you can't be emotionally attached to it. So Saturn is objective. It's detached or distant, and it's realistic. Now we have a good idea of what Saturn and Leo are both about separately. We can now put them side by side and talk about what we should interpret if Saturn goes into Leo. The first thing is that Saturn is subordinate, but Leo is dominant. So that's a direct clash. So it signifies problems with subordination and dominance. So some ways to describe this. One way is an authority complex, an authority complexity, problems with authorities, problems being an authority. Another thing is problems following the rules established by authorities, problems accepting advice, problems complying with orders. Being iconoclastic, which means liking to tear down the accomplishments of an authority. Being the underdog, the one who can rise up against an authority. And most of this stuff, because Leo signifies the mature masculine, therefore the archetype is the father. So most of this stuff will be rooted in the person's relationship to their father. Another important thing about Saturn in Leo is that Saturn is detached and Leo is insensitive. So this is on the same page. But the overall nature of Saturn in Leo is extreme detriment. So even when you have something on the same page, it could produce a good result, but it could also produce a difficult result falling in line with the basic clash between the subordinate and the dominant. So the good result from this detachment and insensitivity is you don't get bruised easy, you don't get hurt easy, so you can keep going and do difficult things. But the negative side of this is ruthlessness, stubbornness, unaffectability, and the ability to do terrible things because of being unfeeling. And the third and final very important thing about Saturn in Leo is that Saturn is strict and Leo is imposing. And so again, this is a synergy, but it's in the context of this great detrimental situation of a clash between the subordinate and the dominant. So in a good, very good situation, you could see this as meaning the person will never give up. But if you want to put the negative twist on it and put it in the negative context, you can say they're harsh, brutal, they do not stop when they should stop. Now, this is what Saturn in Leo looks like on paper or in theory. I want to mention to you 2 mitigating factors, and then I also want to show you how it works in a couple of real charts. So the most important mitigating factor is that when a planet is in detriment, it can aspect its domicile because it's opposite to its domicile. So it's possible that some very good things will happen for the house of the domicile. And in Saturn's case, it can also aspect its exaltation sign. So when you have Saturn in Leo, you want to check Libra and Aquarius to see if Saturn can aspect them. And the way that you check that is you check to see how well Saturn aligns with the ascendant degree. The better that it aligns with the ascendant degree, the better that it will align with the cusp of each house, and therefore the more it will aspect any particular house. The other thing is the actual dignity of a planet in detriment is determined by its relationship to the host. So in this case, the relationship between Saturn and the Sun can mitigate the negativity of Saturn being in Leo. The basic rule of thumb here is the closer the Sun gets to Saturn without getting in the same sign, the better. But if it's in the same sign, it's worse. And generally, 90 degrees away from Saturn is considered the cutoff where it starts to get worse again if it gets too far away. Those are 2 mitigating factors pertaining to Saturn and Leo. Of course, there's many others, etc. But those are the 2 very pertinent direct ones that I want to bring up in this video. Now let's take a look at some people who have Saturn and Leo. Adolf Hitler. definitely the poster child and the picture in the dictionary next to the entry for Saturn in Leo. Also, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, Nelson Mandela, Indira Gandhi, Arnold Schwarzenegger. What almost all of these politicians have in common is that they're either underdogs or they're associated with revolutions, and many of them are really able to do difficult or unsavory things. Another person with Saturn in Leo is Ted Bundy, the serial killer, another kind of poster child. Then we have musicians, Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Elton John, Iggy Pop, and Beethoven. Most of these people are really illustrative of the iconoclastic nature. We have these two important writers, Stephen King and Steven Spielberg. And then finally, even less kind of caricature of Saturn in Leo, perhaps Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, Socrates, and Rousseau. So what I want to do is take somebody who is very, very typical of Saturn in Leo, like Ted Bundy. Look at that chart and see why. And then compare it with somebody who doesn't seem as typical of Saturn in Leo, like let's say Deepak Chopra. And compare the two of those charts and then compare both of them to another typical Saturn in Leo, which is Hitler. Let's do that. So if we start with Ted Bundy and ask, why is this guy such a literal match for like harshness, brutality, doing terrible things, ruthless, stubborn, unstoppable, breaking the law? Why is he such an exact match? Well, one thing is, Saturn is very dominant in this chart. It's a main player in this chart because it's alone in the first house. Another thing is that he only has 3 signs occupied by actual planets. Leo, Scorpio, and Sagittarius are the only 3 signs occupied by actual planets. And that is called Shula Yoga, which is a spear and inclines people to be angry, combative, sometimes violent. So when you put these two together, Saturn and Leo with the Shula Yoga of only 3 signs occupied, it's pushing more towards being brutal. The real kicker, the real key point for Ted Bundy is his moon. His moon is conjoined by Mars, and it's not just any old Mars, it's Mars which is conjoined to Ketu. So when Mars is conjoined with Ketu, it's amplified very intensely, and you can see they're very, very conjoined. They're within a degree of each other, and the moon is close to both of them. So all things considered, the whole context of his chart is very supportive of brutality and anger and violence. In that context, Saturn and Leo can really show this potential that it has for being brutal and terrible. Does Ted Bundy have the mitigating effect that I mentioned, checking for the aspects to Aquarius and Libra? No, he doesn't. So to show you why, look at the ascendant degree, it's at 25 degrees. And look at the degree of Saturn, it's at 9. That's 16 degrees apart. So his 3rd house and his 7th house aren't really benefiting from Saturn and Leo. Okay, now let's take a look at Deepak Chopra and ask, why is he gentle? Now, mind you, I'm not going to let Deepak Chopra off the hook because he really does illustrate Saturn and Leo, especially with this subordinate-dominant clash. He really clashes with authority, especially scientific authority. He just completely misuses physics and science however the heck he wants, and just does it boldly and openly. So he is very illustrative of the insubordinate and iconoclastic or defiant nature of Saturn in Leo. Yet he's hardly a Hitler and he's hardly a Ted Bundy, and in fact he has a very gentle, new agey, help you kind of feeling to him, which doesn't seem like it matches Saturn in Leo at all. So let's figure that out. The first thing that comes to mind is, well, he has moon in the 7th house. That indicates a person who's graceful. or gentle. And then the other thing is he has Venus with K2 in the 10th. So let me contrast this with Ted Bundy. K2 is going to intensify or amplify a planet that it conjoins. Deepak Chopra has Venus conjoined to K2. So it's his Venus which is getting intensified. Ted Bundy has Mars conjoined K2, even more closely than Deepak. So Ted Bundy's Mars is getting very amplified by K2, where it's Deepak Chopra, it's Venus. And as you know, Venus is peaceful or gentle, and Mars is angry or violent. And both of the two are influential. Bundy's amplified Mars is very influential because it's very close to his moon, and Chopra's amplified Venus is very influential because it's very close to the 10th house cusp, or at least the K2 is. So in that sense, Bundy and Chopra are like opposites. And also Deepak Chopra has a very nice first lord. So he has the first lord in the 9th house with the 9th lord and the 7th lord. So this is putting a context to the chart of being interested in morality, interested in helping people, interested in doing good things. In that context, he has Saturn in Leo. So really what comes out, what Saturn and Leo can do in that context is just make you rebellious. Does Deepak Chopra have the special effect on Libra and Aquarius? Yes, he does, and Ted Bundy didn't. So again, why is that? It's because the ascendant for Deepak Chopra is 17 degrees, and Saturn in Deepak Chopra's chart is at 8 degrees. So that's 9 degrees apart. It's fairly close. And Saturn is approaching that degree. So it's less than the ascendant degree. So Saturn will have a strong aspect on the houses, therefore. So for Deepak Chopra, his 6th, 8th, and 12th are affected by Saturn. This is what gives him his karma to be a doctor. And furthermore, Saturn in the 6th house is the most ideal house you could put Saturn in. It's the most mitigating of Saturn's problems. And also, Saturn's distance from the sun is very good for Deepak Chopra, and it's not for Ted Bundy. So this is how Deepak Chopra is quite different from Ted Bundy. And that's why he's not so brutal like Ted Bundy. Now, finally, let's wrap it up by looking at Adolf Hitler, and let's just make a quick assessment of whether Adolf Hitler looks more like Deepak Chopra or looks more like Ted Bundy. The first thing that's very important is the difference between their moons. And Deepak Chopra has a nice, simple moon in Virgo. But Ted Bundy has a moon with the node, and Adolf Hitler has a moon with the node. Whereas Deepak Chopra's moon is right in the middle of the two nodes. So Deepak Chopra's moon is almost as far away as you can get from the nodes. And Bundy and Hitler, they have their moon very close to the nodes. That is a big difference. And then when you consider that with the node, for both Bundy and Adolf Hitler, is a problematic planet, then you see that this is super important. So in Ted Bundy's case, his moon is with a Mars K2. Mars is problematic by itself because it's malefic, but when it's with K2, it's very problematic. And Jupiter is not a problematic planet on its own, but when it's debilitated, it is. And Hitler has Jupiter K2 with his moon. So this is a very important way in which Ted Bundy and Adolf Hitler have the same kind of soul to their chart. Adolf Hitler also has no special effect to Libra and Aquarius, and so with that, he's also like Ted Bundy and not like Deepak Chopra. And I also want to say that Deepak Chopra is the only one here of the three that has the first lord in a really likable condition. And finally, problematic Mars is dominant for Hitler and Bundy, but dignified Mars is dominant for Chopra. So in Hitler's case, his Mars is problematic because it's being defeated in war, and because it's in a sign of an enemy with that enemy. So it's a really undignified Mars that Hitler has. Bundy He's got a problematic Mars because of its proximity to K2, which is classical bad news for Mars. So both Bundy and Hitler, they have a really problematic Mars, but Deepak Chopra has a really nice Mars, dignified in its own sign and conjoined to Jupiter. So now that you see these three charts, I think you can understand how Saturn in Leo works not only on paper, but in the context of a whole chart. Now, if you want to see these kind of interpretations for your chart, for every planet in every sign and every house, every nakshatra with all the aspects, etc., I have a report that will do that for you. You can go to my website, victorcara.com/R2 if you want to go straight to the report, and you can order this report called The Guided Tour to Your Birth Chart, or the Birth Chart Overview. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week for Saturn in Virgo.